Okay, I'll be honest. There are sections of Paul's letters that I rather wish he hadn't written. I'm not the first person to point out that Paul's view of women and their place in society has caused all sorts of issues through the years. But I also continue to say that Paul was writing in a time and place far different and far removed from our time and place. Paul didn't know that he was writing what would be included in the Christian biblical canon. Is it possible he would have said things differently if he had? Maybe. But then again, the very nature of the Bible itself is that it contains the writings and reflections of people who were trying to figure out what faithfulness looked like in their time and place. It is the very same task that faces us today. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. So how do we know what we're supposed to believe and do as Christian people? For some, opening the Bible is all about finding specific answers to specific questions. And that is certainly one way to look at it. Bible scholar and teacher Peter Enns suggests, correctly I think, that the Bible is not best approached as an answer book, though that's how many of us treat it. Instead, he suggests that it's a book of wisdom, a book that invites us into an ongoing quest as we read how our forebears tried to work out some of the same questions. The issue is that the Bible doesn't deal with every situation we face in life. So rather than look for specific answers, better to read it as something more like a hiker's map, where some of the trails are clearly marked, but where there is freedom to find one's own way through the wilderness. With that in mind, we can approach a difficult passage in 1 Corinthians 11 with a little more confidence. Let me just read a portion of this difficult passage. Some of you will find the hair on the back of your head standing on end as I read it. Paul writes, I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the husband is the head of his wife, and God is the head of Christ. Any man who prays or prophesies with something on his head disgraces his head, but any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled disgraces her head. It is one and the same thing as having her head shaved. For if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or to be shaved, she should wear a veil. For a man ought not to have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God, but woman is the reflection of man. Indeed, man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for the sake of woman, but woman for the sake of man. Yikes! Gentlemen, I dare you to insist on this in your own household. Call me if you do, and tell me how it goes. I'm betting it doesn't go well. The problem is, we tend to think that Paul is always writing universal principles. Nothing could be further from the truth. Paul was writing a letter to a particular church in a particular city in a particular time. We are not that same church. We don't live in that culture, and we don't live in that time. So instead of thinking of this as Paul's fixed and final instructions on the relationships between men and women for all time, what if instead we look at this as his advice to that church about how to deal with a particular controversy, one that is time-bound, not timeless? We already know that the Corinthians were arguing about a great many things. What if Paul was just trying to take this issue off the table for the time being? In fact, 1 Corinthians goes on to take up yet another controversy in this congregation, this one having to do with how they practiced the Lord's Supper. I urge you to read this section to get a flavor of the controversy. Paul's answer to it, though, is brilliant, and in a very real sense places the controversy about the role of women in a distinctly secondary place. That is, the words he says about communion are words we continue to repeat each and every time we share the Lord's Supper, even today. Pay attention to how he begins. For I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and you drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So these are two very different kinds of instructions. One time-bound, the other timeless. One, a set of instructions from Paul to the Corinthians. The other, a set of instructions from the risen Christ to Paul. Who would argue that these two sets of instructions are of equal weight and value? Certainly not I. That would be the height of folly. Tomorrow, Paul at his very best. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.